Chen Chen's photography studio had never been a place for inspiration. It was more of a glorified closet, packed with dusty lenses, crumpled old film canisters, and just enough space for him to maneuver his tripod in between occasional coughing fits from the stale air. The walls were peppered with half-hearted attempts at modern art, blurred street scenes, landscapes with a bit too much contrast, abstract compositions that screamed "try hard" more than visionary. In short, it was a place where dreams went to die, one failed photograph at a time. He should have known better than to take this project seriously. After all, Chen Chen wasn't exactly the type to create profound art that would make people weep, but he had his moments. And the exhibition he was working toward was supposed to be his moment. But here he was, once again, in front of his latest disaster, a photograph of a sculpture that had more light flares than actual subject matter. It was meant to symbolize something. What? He had no idea. He was just trying to get something good for the show. He sat down at his desk, the lens cap of his camera spinning between his fingers, when a soft ping startled him. It was an email. A message from an art dealer, probably another rejection or a vague "will keep you in mind" response. He opened it with half-hearted curiosity. It wasn't from the dealer. The subject line, "We know what you've become. Join us." He blinked, confused. Who was this? A weird ad? A prank? He scanned the email, squinting at the cryptic language. "We have been watching you. The light has chosen you. Your abilities are beyond the ordinary. We are the luminaries, and you have a unique role to play in shaping the world. Come meet us, and we will guide you toward the next phase of your evolution. Join us, and you will not regret it." And then, the symbol, a triangle, with rays of light coming from all points, stretching toward infinity. Chen Chen stared at the screen, completely thrown. He wasn't the kind of person who took things seriously. He'd get pranked by strangers all the time, convinced the world had some weird cosmic joke going on. But this? This felt different. Before he could shut the laptop down in irritation, a loud, metallic crash from outside the studio broke his thoughts. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. He got up quickly, heading toward the window. What he saw froze him in place. A glowing blue laser beam was slicing through the sky, cutting through the thick air in tight, concentric rings. It pulsed like a living thing. And then, as if guided by some invisible hand, the beam aimed itself at his building with terrifying precision. Shit. He stumbled back as the beam hit his window with a deafening pop, shattering the glass into a million pieces. For a split second, he thought he saw the light bend around the shards, distorting the room in strange, wavy shapes. It felt like time slowed. And then, blackness. When he woke up, the room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of some strange machinery in the distance. His head throbbed, but there was no dizziness. No ringing in his ears. For the first time in years, he could feel the air itself. It was different. His eyes opened wider, and his surroundings slowly came into focus. The dim studio was bathed in a soft, pulsing light. But it wasn't the usual light. This wasn't the harsh fluorescent or the slanting rays of the sun that peeked through his broken blinds. This was something more. Alive. He could feel it. Like a thread of energy moving through the very space around him. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was some post-blow concussion hallucination. But the glow persisted, surrounding him, whispering to him. For a moment, he stood there, too stunned to move. Then, on impulse, he lifted his hand and focused on a distant object, a chair that had been knocked over when the glass shattered. He squinted at it, trying to ignore the pounding headache. To his amazement, as he extended his palm, the chair began to lift off the ground, a soft glow emanating from it. The chair hovered for a second before it was gently placed back down, as if obeying a command he hadn't consciously given. What the hell? His voice broke the silence, but the words sounded distant, almost foreign. They weren't his own. They felt like they had been carved into the space around him. Chen Chen looked down at his hands, trying to make sense of what was happening. Light, he could control it. The pulse, the glow, he could feel it inside him. He flexed his fingers, and suddenly the light around him shimmered like water, swirling into intricate patterns. He could bend it. Shape it. He held out his hand again, and this time, he shaped the light into a perfect sphere, a glowing ball that floated above his palm. It wasn't just light. It was energy. And he could manipulate it. He looked at the computer on his desk, almost in a trance. Without thinking, he focused again, and the monitor flickered before his eyes, the image distorted, and then, in a sudden burst, the screen shattered into hundreds of tiny, glowing pixels, floating in midair. Holy shit. This wasn't just a power to create pretty effects. This was something more. The potential was limitless. Chen Chen stood there for a long time, staring at the remnants of his shattered computer, trying to process everything. His heart raced, and his thoughts were a blur. But there was no doubt about it, he had changed. Something had happened, and he was now part of something bigger. For the first time in ages, he felt alive. Powerful. Later that night, after he had calmed down, Chen Chen began experimenting. He created holographic projections of himself, watching as his doppelganger performed his every move, mimicking him with eerie precision. He bent light to create walls of shimmering, translucent energy, forming an invisible barrier around him. At one point, he even convinced a lamp to flicker and then suddenly explode in a shower of sparks, as if it were a bomb. But then it happened. While focusing too hard on a reflection in a broken mirror, he willed the light to shift in a way that he thought was harmless, just a test. But to his horror, the light pulsed too quickly, too violently. A bookshelf near him suddenly disintegrated into dust. The sound of it collapsing was like a violent gust of wind tearing through his studio. The explosion of force was not from any visible object. It was the light itself, overwhelming his control. He barely managed to step back in time. Breathing heavily, he wiped his forehead. The power was too strong to control at times. But the potential to create, to destroy, was more than he had ever dreamed of. A few days later, Chen Chen had managed to regain some semblance of order. His apartment was a mess of light sculptures, burned papers, and shattered objects, but his mind was focused. He knew he had to learn more about this strange ability, before it consumed him, and that's when it happened again. His phone buzzed on the table, another email. But this time, the message was different. A simple line, direct and concise: "We are coming for you." Chen Chen sat at his desk, staring at the words on his phone screen, feeling a shiver run down his spine. "We are coming for you." It was too much like the other strange message he'd received, the one about the luminaries. But this one was more direct, more foreboding. He could sense that something was happening, something he didn't understand, and the closer he got to the answers, the more he felt like he was losing control. The light around him hummed, faintly, as if it were alive. He couldn't shake the feeling that his powers weren't just a fluke or an accident, they were part of something much larger. The glowing energy that he'd learned to manipulate was no longer just a curiosity. It was a force he didn't fully understand, and one he wasn't sure he could control. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The room seemed too still, too charged, and his own heartbeat seemed too loud in his ears. What was he supposed to do with all this? A knock at the door startled him, the sound too crisp and deliberate to be a coincidence. He didn't move at first, the reality of his situation sinking in. The luminaries weren't just a bunch of weirdos sending cryptic emails. They were real. And they knew who he was, what he had become. They were coming for him, just like they said. With a deep breath, he stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He hesitated, but only for a moment. The door knocked again, louder this time, almost impatient. Reluctantly, he walked to the door and pulled it open. Standing there, dressed in a sharp black suit, was a man who seemed to fit right into a spy thriller. His face was composed, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, even though it was night. He wasn't holding a weapon, but the way he stood made it clear that he didn't need one. There was an authority about him, an unmistakable sense of control. "Chen Chen," the man asked, his voice flat but not unfriendly. "You've been expecting us?" Chen Chen didn't answer immediately. The words from the email were still echoing in his mind. "We are coming for you." This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. He could run. He could fight. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like running. He felt the weight of his newfound powers like a hammer over his head, and he knew he wasn't equipped to face it alone. Not anymore. Instead, he stepped aside, wordlessly, allowing the man to enter. "Who are you?" Chen Chen asked once the man had crossed the threshold, his voice hoarse, still grappling with the shock of the last few days. "My name is Agent X," the man replied coolly. "I work for an organization you've heard of, the Luminaries." He paused, watching Chen Chen closely, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to offer you a choice." Chen Chen raised an eyebrow. A choice? What did that even mean? His mind raced as he struggled to process what was happening. "I don't know what the hell this is," Chen Chen muttered, his eyes darting to the strange light floating around him. The air in the room felt like it was alive with static. "I didn't ask for any of this. I'm just..." He stopped himself, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "What do you want from me?" Agent X didn't seem surprised by Chen Chen's hesitation. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek, black tablet. He handed it to Chen Chen, who reluctantly took it, still unsure of what was happening. "Take a look," Agent X said, his voice cold but not unkind. "This is what you've become part of." The tablet lit up, displaying images of high-tech equipment, shadowy figures in suits, and cryptic symbols that made Chen Chen's pulse spike. There were also diagrams of light beams, their intensities increasing as they passed through various substances, breaking them down or altering their structure entirely. "These are our operatives," Agent X continued, pointing at a series of images showing people in black suits, each with an eerie glow around them. "They are the ones who can manipulate light, like you. We've been monitoring individuals with these abilities for some time now. Some of them join us. Some of them don't. But they all come to the same conclusion eventually." Chen Chen's mind was racing. His fingers tightened around the tablet. "What do you want from me?" Agent X took a step closer, his gaze steady. "We want you to join us. To use your abilities for the greater good. You're not just a photographer, Chen Chen. You're something more. Something the world will need." Chen Chen's breath caught. I'm not sure I understand," he stammered, his head spinning with everything he had just learned. His powers? The Luminaries? The world would need him? How could they possibly need someone like him? "You've already learned the basics," Agent X said, as if reading his thoughts. "The potential to manipulate light and shadow is something that can change the course of human history. Your powers, when fully developed, could create illusions so convincing that they could deceive entire populations. You could shape reality itself. Or destroy it." Chen Chen shook his head, stepping back. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to become whatever I am now. I don't even understand it. It's just light. Light and shadow." His voice wavered, but he held onto the tablet with a white-knuckled grip, trying to steady himself. "What the hell am I supposed to do with it? How do I control it?" Agent X's expression softened, ever so slightly. "Control comes with time. With training. But you'll have to decide quickly. You don't have much time, Chen Chen. Others are already aware of your abilities. They'll be coming for you soon. You can join us and learn to harness your powers, or you can continue to hide and risk the consequences." "Consequences?" Chen Chen echoed, his voice rising. "What do you mean, risk the consequences?" Agent X's face remained impassive. "There are those who don't seek to protect the world. There are those who would use your abilities to enslave others. To bend reality to their will. To rule. He paused. And you'll be caught in the middle, whether you want it or not. The only question is whether you'll be the one in control of your powers, or whether they will control you. Chen Chen's breath quickened. A chill ran down his spine. The room suddenly felt too small, the weight of his decision pressing on him. The idea of joining this mysterious organization, of being trained, of learning to control his abilities, felt both appealing and terrifying. But there was a darker part of him that was afraid of losing himself in the process. Afraid of what he might become. I need time, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Agent X didn't flinch. You have until tomorrow night. After that, we'll be forced to take more direct action. Before Chen Chen could say anything else, Agent X turned and walked toward the door. He paused before leaving, looking over his shoulder. Think carefully, Chen Chen. This is your only chance to choose. And with that, he was gone. Chen Chen stood alone in the center of his studio, the silence pressing in around him. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time, he realized how deeply he was tangled in something far beyond his understanding. The glowing light flickered around him, as if waiting for him to make a decision. His reflection in the mirror distorted and shifted, like it was alive, like it was calling out to him. What had he gotten himself into, and more importantly, what was he going to do about it? Chen Chen stood in the center of his studio, the faint glow of light flickering around him like a living, breathing thing. It moved in waves, pulses of energy that seemed to answer the tension inside him. He was still reeling from Agent X's visit, the weight of the decision pressing down on him with every passing second. The message had been clear: join the luminaries, learn to control the power he'd been thrust into, or face an uncertain future. What did he really want? What did he even need? He glanced at the shattered remains of his studio, the remnants of his old life scattered on the floor. Broken lenses, cracked pictures, the jagged edges of a life that was now slipping away with every moment he lingered in indecision. The glow around him pulsed again, louder now, almost as if it were speaking to him. It was impossible to ignore it. There was no time left to question what had happened to him. That much was clear. His powers weren't just a gift, they were a burden. The luminaries had seen to that. They were right. There were those who would use his abilities for their own purposes, and worse, there were others who didn't care how they destroyed anyone who got in their way. And now, they were watching him, waiting for him to decide. But what if he didn't want to be a pawn in their game? What if he didn't want to play at all? Chen Chen's thoughts whirled. He thought back to the feeling when he first realized he could control the light. The wonder of it. The joy, even, of bending the world to his will, if only for a moment. It had been intoxicating, like a new addiction, a heady mix of power and freedom. But that feeling came with a price. Now that the thrill had faded, all he was left with was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of becoming something else. As the night wore on, the decision ate at him. The hours stretched like elastic, pulling him in opposite directions. He needed to make a choice. A real choice. Not just to escape, not just to hide away in a corner of his mind. He had to act. Or he would be swept away by forces too powerful to ignore. A knock at the door jolted him out of his thoughts. It was the same rhythmic, measured knock as before, one he couldn't ignore. Chen Chen's stomach twisted. He'd known this moment would come. Agent X had said they would return the next night, and here they were. He opened the door. Agent X was there again, standing like a shadow in the dim light of the hallway. His sunglasses were gone, revealing eyes that seemed unnaturally calm. He wasn't alone this time. Behind him stood another figure, someone taller, more imposing, wearing a dark jacket and a hood that obscured most of their face. The person didn't speak, just stood there, silently watching, as if waiting for something. The air felt thick with unspoken words, the tension almost suffocating. Chen Chen, Agent X said, his voice even, but something cold underlay the words. Time's up. Chen Chen swallowed. He knew what that meant. He had to make the choice now. I'm still not sure about this, he replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. I don't know who to trust. I don't even know what you want from me. The silence stretched. The person behind Agent X shifted slightly, their presence an unmistakable weight. But it was Agent X who spoke again, his tone unflinching. We're not asking you to trust us. We're asking you to trust yourself. You have power, Chen Chen. More than you realize. But power without purpose is a dangerous thing. It's chaotic. Destructive. That's why we offer you a path, a way to control it. To make sure you don't lose yourself. I don't want to be a soldier, Chen Chen said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The thought of training, of becoming some kind of weapon, made him shiver. He didn't want to be used. He didn't want to become a part of something that felt so alien. Then don't be one, Agent X replied, his voice surprisingly soft. But understand this, without guidance, without structure, your abilities will only grow stronger. And when they do, they'll make you a target. Not just from us, but from forces you can't even comprehend. Chen Chen hesitated. He had learned, in the last few days, just how easy it was for light to become something far more dangerous than art or illusion. It could destroy. It could break things apart, tear them to pieces. He could see that now. But was it worth risking everything for control? Was it worth giving up the freedom he had left? And what happens if I say no? He asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Agent X's expression darkened, just for a moment. Then you will be alone. And there are others who will come for you. Those who would use you, destroy you. For what? To exploit your abilities, to turn you into something you don't even recognize. We're offering you a chance to choose your own path. For a long moment, Chen Chen stared at Agent X. The man wasn't threatening him. Not directly, anyway. But there was something about him, something in his cold certainty that unsettled Chen Chen. It wasn't just the power they wielded, or the threat they posed. It was the weight of their expectation. They wanted him. Wanted him to choose their side, to be part of something bigger than himself. But could he trust them? He didn't know. Not really, but there was something else at play, something deeper. His mind flashed back to the time before everything changed, before the laser and the glow and the madness. The times he had spent wasting away in his studio, shooting photos that didn't matter. Lost in his own self-doubt. His hands clenched into fists as the weight of the decision settled in his chest. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, he said finally, his voice low. But I can't keep running. Not from this. Not from what I've become. Agent X gave a single nod. Good. That's all we ask. He gestured to the figure behind him. This is Mara, he said. She's one of our top operatives. She'll take you through the first steps. We'll help you control your power. But you need to decide. The sooner, the better. Mara stepped forward, her movements fluid and silent, like a shadow. She was tall, with an angular face that betrayed no emotion. She studied Chen Chen for a moment, then spoke, her voice smooth and cold, but with a strange kind of warmth. Do you know what it's like, she asked, to be able to bend the world to your will? To see the way light and shadow dance at your command? It's not a gift, Chen Chen. It's a responsibility. One that comes with its own dangers. She paused. We're the only ones who can help you see through the darkness. To truly understand the power you have. Chen Chen felt the weight of her words sink in. His mind raced, but for the first time since all of this had started, he felt something like clarity. He could feel the power buzzing under his skin, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Maybe this was what he had been looking for all along. Maybe the chance to control it, to shape it, was the only real choice he had left. He nodded, slowly. All right. I'll join you, he said, the words coming out with more certainty than he had expected. But I'm doing this on my terms. Agent X didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes that softened, just for a moment. We wouldn't have it any other way. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Chen Chen alone with Mara. She gave him a long, assessing look, then motioned for him to follow. This isn't going to be easy, she said as they walked toward the door. But it's the only way you'll survive. Chen Chen followed her, the hum of light still pulsing around him, growing stronger with every step. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: there was no going back.